I lifted off the science show, but I did get their permission. And the science show, if no one's ever listened to it, is, does anyone listen to the science show? Oh man, it's the best hour of the week on a Saturday at 12 o'clock every week since I've been about 10. Oh, not always at 12 o'clock. Used to be after the Goons, which sadly they've moved. At 10, from 10 to 1 is something called The Science Show on ABC Radio National, where Robin Williams, not the comedian, but the Australian science reporter, journalist, interviews and talks about science with famous scientists and mathematicians and cool people from around the world. Every week, it is the best hour of the week. You can get it podcast. And yeah, so everyone should listen to that on Radio National. It is so cool. And here now is 5 minutes of it.
And I'll end with the last story.
Oh, no.
A chimpanzee whose mother was shot, again when he was about 1.5 in Africa.
This is Jane Goodall.
And he was shipped to a zoo in North America. And for about 10, 15 years, he lived quite by himself in a small cage with iron bars and a cement floor. This highly social being, alone, bored stiff. And then a new zoo director decided that he would build the biggest enclosure in North America. He surrounded it with a moat filled with water because chimps don't swim. He got 19 other chimpanzees who wanted a nice big gene pool. First, it took a long time before they were all introduced to each other because there's always this competition for dominance among the males. And eventually it's all done and they're all let into the enclosure. And it's fine until one of the young males challenges the senior male. And the senior male is he who has previously lived alone in his little cage. Jojo, his name is. And as this young male comes charging towards him with the typical dominance display of the adult male, hair bristling, throwing stones and so forth, Jojo is terrified. He never had a chance to learn about these things because he left his mother so young. And in his fear, he goes into the water. He doesn't know anything about water either. It's something you drink in a cup. And he's so frightened, he gets over the railing that's been built to stop the chimps drowning in the deep water beyond. 3 times he disappears under the water. 3 times he comes up, gasping for breath, and then he's gone. And luckily for him, there's a man now who visits the zoo 1 day a year with his wife and his 3 little girls. And he jumps in, even though the keeper grabs him, tells him Jojo weighs 130 pounds, that male chimps are very strong and can be very dangerous, all of which is true, and that he will be killed. But Rick pulls away, he swims feeling under the water, he touches Jojo's body, gets this 130-pound dead weight over his shoulder, feels little movements, Jojo isn't dead. Gets over that railing and pushes Jojo up onto the bank of the enclosure. And then he turns to rejoin his rather hysterical family. There was a woman there, and she had a video camera. She does not remember filming, but she did. And so we can see and hear what happened next. First of all, the people on the far side of the moat begin renewing their screaming for Rick to get back. He's going to be killed because they can see from their higher place 3 of the big males with bristling hair coming to see what the commotion is about. And at the same time, Jojo is sliding back towards the water because the bank was too steep. It was faulty design. And the camera that's all over the place, amazingly and accidentally, steadies on Rick as he stands there with one hand on the railing. And you see him look up at his wife and kids. And you see him look to where these 3 males are approaching. And then you see him looking down at Jojo, who's just disappearing under the water again. And for a moment, he stands there motionless. And then he went back. And again he pushed Jojo up. And this time he stayed there. He's pushing as hard as he can. Jojo is making feeble efforts to grab something. Rick is slipping in the mud. And just in time, Jojo gets a thick tuft of grass. And with Rick pushing, manages to pull himself up to where the ground is level. And just in time, Rick gets back over that railing. That evening, that little piece of film was flashed around North America, and the then director of JGI USA saw it. And he called up Mr. Swope. He said, "That was a very brave thing you did. You must have known it was dangerous. Everybody was telling you." you do it? And Rick said, well, you see, I happened to look into his eyes, and it was like looking into the eyes of a man. And the message was, won't anybody help me? And you see, that's the message I've seen in the eyes of the little orphans tied up in the marketplace. It's the look that I've seen from the 5 foot by 5 foot medical lab research prisons. It's the look I've seen from under the frills of the cruelly trained entertainment chimps. It's the look I've seen in the eyes of chained elephants, dogs thrown in the street, beaten horses. But it's the look I've seen too in the eyes of little children who've seen their parents killed in the ethnic violence in Africa. And I've seen it in the eyes of those in the refugee camps, and in the eyes of street children with no homes, and in the eyes of kids caught up in inner city violence with nowhere to turn. And if you see that look, and you feel it in your heart, you have to jump in and try to help. And I think this is my greatest reason for hope. Maybe there are more problems in the world than ever before, or maybe, as I suspect, it's simply because we're so good at reporting them today. But wherever I've seen problems, I've seen a person or a group of passionate and dedicated people who are doing their best to sort that problem out.
Okay, so let's just take.
The integer just happens to be bigger.
Yeah, so what pointing means is it just stores this address number here. So the pointer, which we call pointer, contains BFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFF Now, how much we can fit into the integer depends sort of on where the next thing is stored in memory. I've not got it. Let me just stop this music.
We were watching the Jane Goodall thing and then we lost sound, so I switched to the other mic.
Oh yeah, don't pick it through my mic. Yeah, I turned it off.
Like halfway through it though.
Yeah, because I was clattering around underneath and I thought, oh, you don't want my radio mic sounds. I'm sure you're picking it up off the
Yeah,
speakers.
just as long as you turn it off.
Sorry.
So you've got this pointer which just says the type byte, and you said I'm going to point to an integer.
Yes.
How will it? And if I then put that and go print.
Control?
Yeah. If I then go, print that pointer.
Yeah.
Will that display the whole integer or only a byte worth like the integer?
Yeah. Don't mix the pointer up with what it's pointing to. The pointer is 4 bytes long. It's not an integer, it's not a byte. The pointer itself is a pointer type, which happens to take 4 bytes. And if you were going to print the pointer out, which means don't put the star there, that will print out the value of the pointer. If you put the star there, it means print out what the pointer is pointing to.
And it'll print out the whole thing regardless.
If you said print it out as an integer, if you said %d, which means print it out as an integer, it'll print out the whole thing.
Okay.
If you read %, C for char, it'll only print out the first bit.
Okay. Then just go back to the first one. If it's a pointer of the type byte, would
Yes.
that mean that there's only a certain address range it can actually point to?
You never have a pointer of type byte. Pointers are always of type pointer.
But I don't understand why you've I've gone, my example is byte, so I've declared that Z is a pointer of type byte.
No, a pointer to type byte.
What's the subtle difference that I'm
Okay,
seeing?
the type we're talking about is not the type of the value that's stored here, but the type of the value that it points to.
It sort of confuses me because then you make it point to an integer. Not
Yes.
a byte.
Let me write that down because I think this is such a good question. I'm going to do it. How about I try and answer that for everyone, and then at the end, if I haven't got it, you come back to me and we'll do it together at the end. Okay, everyone. So, the interesting thing for me, oh, there are many interesting things about that clip. Of course, it's very moving, and she has a long conclusion she wants to draw from that, and it's all good and valid. In addition to all of that, I had another thing that interested me about that, which I guess you could sort of see, which is this man risked his life. Now, that's a really good indication that he considered it to be important. And he risked his life for a primate. And now, maybe you're in love with primates and you will, people are in love with all sorts of weird things and do all sorts of, some people think, But more likely to me is the fact that this guy did it not because he went there already being a person that's thinking, if a primate's ever in danger, I'll risk my life to help the primate. But that in some sense he felt the humanity of the primate. And in some sense he was applying a very quick Turing test of his own, and he felt that this was a fellow person in need. Because of course if it was a child doing that, we'd all jump in straight away and help them. Okay? Or if it was someone working for the passport office, even, we'd go in and do that. But a primate, a dog, I don't know. But he obviously did the test. So this question about what is humanity, what does it mean to be human? What would it, for a computer to be intelligent in some way, in an interesting way, so that it could be your friend in some way, to achieve this goal of artificial intelligence, what would it actually mean to do that? And what are the implications of that? And how big a problem is that? And this is something that many people in computing are, and in other fields too, in cognitive psychology and philosophers and all sorts of people, are very interested in this question of just what is it to be a person? What is it to have a soul, if you want, in some way? And is this a simulatable thing? Or is this something that just you can never simulate? We've got it, no other creature ever can, no computer can ever be. It's a very interesting question. To me, the answer is completely not clear, and it's a very interesting question. Okay, so why was I talking about Turing, though? I wanted to come back to Turing because the Turing test itself, I can tell you, is the world's simplest test. And it's astonishing that a mathematician would ever come up with a test like this. His test has nothing to do with numbers or calculations or integrals or anything elaborate or chalk or boards or theorems. His test to see if a computer locked in one room, and you can only communicate with a keyboard, is a computer and not a human, so, is to lock a human in another room and give them a keyboard, and you have a screen communicating with both of those guys and keyboards connecting with both of those guys, and you can have some sort of text-based conversation with these guys, say, but you can't physically see which is which. And the test is simply, can you tell the difference? Which is the most wishy-washy, qualitative, non-mathematical test you could ever think of. And you could rig it up, you could repeat it. It's got to be a repeatable test, and you could set up a confidence interval, and you could select subjects at random and randomise the allocation and you could get sort of statistical certainty that people can or can't tell the difference between them. But ultimately, you can't escape the fact that this is a qualitative test. And it's a very interesting test because suppose, hypothetically, the computer passed the test and you decided you couldn't tell the difference between it and the other person. You felt they were both the same. They were both equally human. What does that mean? And I claim there's sort of two approaches to this result. Suppose we opened the door, ta-da, it was a computer in there, you thought it was a person all along. approach number one, which I'll do on this side of the room, is to say, oh, well, I was wrong. Because it's obviously not self-aware, it's a computer. So I was just wrong. The test failed, I wasn't good enough or something, but it was wrong. Because inside it's just a computer, and we know computers can't be self-aware. And then the other response is over here, which is to say, oh, wow, then it must be self-aware. Now, I must admit, when I first heard the test, I was in this group very strongly. I was thinking, well, it just means you're stupid and you can't tell the difference, but there is a difference because one's a person, one's a computer, and it's just a program, and it's just running a program that someone's written, someone very fallible has written, as we've all learned. And it's just doing completely deterministic things, and it's completely determined, and the program controls what it's doing at every single instant. So there's no notion of intelligence or beauty or wisdom or anything over here. It's just a program, it's just a completely deterministic machine. But then after a while I started to drift over to this side and start to think, well, yeah, I don't even know if I'm more than a deterministic machine, and I don't know, maybe I'm running a program in some sort of biological sense. And really you can't get away from it that if I can't tell the difference between these two things, then they're probably not different. And I've called this philosophy T, named after Turing, but I'm not sure if it's what he meant, so I don't want to call it Turing's philosophy in case I'm misquoting Turing. But what I took away from this was what I call philosophy T, which is this very interesting idea that if something appears to be something else, and it appears to be something else so closely you can't tell the difference, it is that thing. Over here they'd say, it appears very closely to be that thing. Now, if I could characterize the two different points of view, this is what we call an extensional point of view. All that counts about anything is what I can see about it, what I can see, its externalities, its extension. So I can look at you, I can talk to you, I can communicate with you, I could chop you up, but I never would, and do chemical tests on you. I can do all sorts of things. There's certain things I can do, okay, and ways I can interact with you. And for me, that is what you are, the sum of all the ways I can interact with you. Over here you're thinking, yeah, but there's something inside you can't see and you can't ever interact with and it's hidden and it's secret and you just can't see it and it's... But over here you're saying, no, everything is just what it appears to be. And in this excellent book that I know I've mentioned before, Godel, Escher, Bach, which is the book that first introduced me to Turing, which everyone should get, such a cool book, he has this hypothetical like a conversation, a dialogue, where someone's saying, with the computer, what's your favourite poem? And the computer's saying, oh, I really like Auden. And he said, why do you like Auden? Oh, that poem about the, you know, from Two Forwardings in a Funeral is a very beautiful poem about, you know, muffle the things. It's just, it moves me when I hear it, and somehow he's really articulate, and when he says something, it just captures a feeling that I've always felt inside me and never been able to put into words, and for me that's beautiful poetry. Okay, this is this person over here saying, and the person over here saying, but he's just responding to a program. You know, the program's writing that out. Maybe a programmer told him to say that. But then you could say to it, and what did you think about Forwardings at a Funeral? Or why does it make you feel like that? And if you could keep having this ongoing dialogue with the computer, and the computer would continue to answer questions in a way that you found meaningful and interesting and gave you insights, and you felt you were connecting with their personality, then whether it's a simulated personality or a real personality, over here we say is not even a real question. Does that make sense? But over here we have the intentional camp. And the intentional camp says what counts is what's inside. And although we can never see it or measure it, I know inside of me is a soul, and inside of a computer is an Intel chip. And well, you can see the Intel chip. I want to say something more ephemeral than that. There's something inside the computer, because obviously you could replace me bit by bit, saw my arms off, replace them with metal, saw my head off, replace it with something else, take bits of my brain out and put circuitry in, slowly replacing it. And eventually, as you did each little thing, I'd still be the same person, if we could do that to the brain. And at the end, maybe I'd be entirely metal. Yeah, but I'd still be me. And you know, at what point would I, yeah, So this intentional versus extensional debate is really interesting, and you probably belong to one or the other camp, and the other camp probably seems ludicrous to you, and it took me a long time to move across from one to the other. But now I believe all that counts about everything is how it appears, and if you can never tell the difference between two things, and we're now in the land of, what's that excellent film with the tall comedian Jim Carrey?
Does such a film exist with Jim Carrey?
No, oh yeah, he's done some fantastic films. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. No, there's this really good film about him being in a Truman Show, in a completely artificial world. But he ultimately finds out, okay, so it wasn't a perfect artificial world and he could tell. But what if he'd gone from birth to death and never being able to tell that the person he was married to was an actress who was paid to pretend that she loves him? And she did it so well that he could never tell the difference, and they had long conversations where she poured her meaning out and she wrote him letters, and they spent all this time together kissing and cuddling, and she stroked his arm affectionately when he's feeling stressed. She did everything that someone truly in love with you would do, and he could never tell. She's not in love, she's a paid actress. From his point of view, she's in love with him. Okay. So this is the difference between the two. Now, why do we talk about it now, other than being interesting and related to Turing and blah, 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 blah? Because the extensional and intentional point of view are exactly what good programming is based about. Good programming is when you write your functions and you adopt the extensional point of view for your functions. So all that matters about your function is how you can interact with it and how it behaves. I don't care what's hidden inside it, the intention of the function. I can't see the lines of code inside. All I can see is what I stick into the function and what comes out. And if two functions, you write a function, you write a function. They've both got the same name, different code inside, but I stick everything into yours and I get all the right answers out, and I stick the same things into yours and I get the same answers out. Extensionally, we say those two functions are equivalent. So this is why we really like functions rather than subroutines. If you're already a programmer, you've seen subroutines. Because a function encapsulates everything in a plastic bag, no one's allowed to look inside the plastic bag, and all that we care about is the external behavior of the function, ignoring side effects. Okay? So we are going to adopt an extensional point of view in this course in looking at our functions, and later on when we start doing programming in the large, you'll see we are actually just doing extensional design. We're designing things and all we care about is their behavior. And we're going to tightly specify their behavior and leave everything else open. And that's going to suddenly liberate us to do amazing things. So that's the vague link. Now, there was a good question during the break. Someone asked me, byte star Z. And their notes said, so I most likely said it the wrong way, Z is a pointer of type byte. Now, if I said that, I was wrong. Because byte star Z, what does that mean? Z is a pointer which points to a byte. Now, we're going to get into this same dilemma that I said we're always going to fall into. We're going to get confused between a pointer and what it points to. So let me just say, there's an area of memory called Z, and it contains a number. Maybe the number it contains is 57. Somewhere there's a memory location called 57 that contains the number 42. If I printed out Z, what would I get? 57. If I printed out star Z, what would I get? 42. If I printed out ampersand Z, what would I get? The address of Z, wherever it happens to be stored. Maybe it's stored at location 100. Does that make sense? No? I'll say it again more slowly. Z is stored at location 100. At location 57 is stored 42. The contents of location 100 are 57. Whenever I use the word Z in the C program, I'm meaning the contents of this memory location. That's normally what you mean when you say a variable name. You mean that somewhere in the compiler there's a table that for every variable has a little address that says where the contents of that variable are stored. So whenever the compiler sees Z, it thinks, oh yeah, whatever's stored at location 100. Now if I printed out Z, I'm printing out the contents of Z, which is what's stored at 100, which is 57. And if I printed out star Z, the star in front means dereference it. It means go to wherever that points. So 57 points to this cell here. So if I printed out star Z, I'd be printing out 42. Does that make sense? Now all pointers are the same size. There is no pointer that is a byte. On my system, I think the pointers are 4 bytes long. They're not ints, they're pointer type. So this will always be 4 bytes long, regardless of whether it's pointing to a 4 byte long thing or a 1 byte long thing or a 100 byte long thing. The pointer will always be 4 bytes long because that's how many bytes I need to give an address on my system. Does that make sense? Yes?
When do you put the star in front of the pointer or behind it?
Why do you put the star in front of the pointer or behind it? You put the star in front of Z to dereference Z. But notice it's going after the byte. So the star goes after the type and before the variable. So when I did a typecast before, I said byte star. Okay, that was saying, so if I said byte star X, what I mean is by playing our game, X points to a byte. Stars and ampersands will confuse you a lot, and we're going to be doing them lots. So this is just the first lecture where we see them. Okay, you don't have to master the whole thing straight away. Good question. Any more questions? All right, I want to show you something cool. We're going to look at looping now. Yay! The existing programmers have been itching to get to loops. For so long we haven't had loops. Let's look at how to do a loop. And here's an example I prepared earlier. Open a recent project. Oh, damn. All right, here's an example I'm just about to create. Let's go. The world's fastest new project. New project. Chum. And jiggle around aimlessly. Then find command line utility. Standard tool. Create it. Call it weak for loop. Choose. Accept. Finish. Main. Okay, here we go. So here's our program. Let's just turn off all the lights. And let's see the program. So we're going to make a loop. Now, what I want to do first of all is I want to print out the letter E 10 times. There are two ways of doing it. One is each one on a different line. I could just say printf E. And I could do that. Did I say 10 times? I should be more base 2, shouldn't I? Let's do that 8 times, because then I can double that 3 times. And I'll get 8. Okay, so this will work. Let's just check that it works. Printing it out, it'll work properly, and I go what? Design, run, console. And you can see there's a whole lot of E's coming up there. Printed it with the greatest of ease. All right, 8 E's. But it's not so good to do the same thing over and over again unless you've got a really good reason to do it. Much better, because it's error prone as well as being annoying to type it. You're bound to get it wrong one of those loops. One of those times. It'd be much better if we looped 8 times. So let's do that. Here's how we do it. I'm going to have to keep track of how many times I'm looping, so I'm going to create a variable which keeps track of that, and I'm going to call that my counter. And I'm going to say initially the counter is 0. And then I'm going to say while the counter is less than 8, I'm going to print E. Now let's have a look what's going to happen here. The counter is going to be initialized to 0, so counter 0. It then does this test. Is the counter less than 8? Yes. Yes. It executes then everything between the brackets, which is what? Print out an E. It then tests the condition again. Is the counter still less than 8? Yes. Yes. What's the counter? 0. So what's it going to print out now? And then it's going to test the condition. Is the counter greater than 8, less than 8? Yes, and it's got to keep doing that. And how many E's is it going to print out? An enormous infinity of them, which is 8 on its side. So if we turn the let's go. Here we go. Let's run it. E, it's still going. E, it's just going so good. Oh, look at the scroll bar going up the side. It's printing out all these E's. It's so awesome. How many printfs would you have had to put in to achieve that same wonderful result? Let's just look at all those E's as I scroll up and down. Awesome. I eventually aborted it. Yep, lots of them. See, there's lots of E's, so that's great. What if I only wanted to print 8 of them, though? What should I do inside the loop? I should decrease the counter. I should increase the counter. Oh, I'm making all these mistakes. It's so easy to make mistakes with loops. When you make a mistake with a loop, what happens? Either you don't go into the loop at all, which is really annoying, or you go in and you get stuck in there forever. If you get stuck in there forever, eventually your computer's going to crash and give some sort of error message. I strongly suggest everyone tonight tries to compile a program with a loop in it that goes forever, gets the computer to crash, and write down very carefully what that error message is, so if you ever see that message, you know what might have caused it. Yes?
Are we allowed to use the increment operator now?
Yes, you've all been allowed to use increment operator all along. Increment's cool, but you're not allowed to use it with side effects. So you're not allowed to say something like, you're not allowed to say y equals x plus plus. But you can't say while counter plus plus. No, you can't do that. No, you couldn't say while counter plus plus is less than 8. Because this is using the value of this expression as well as the side effect, which is increasing it. So you can't use the side effect and the value simultaneously. Just pick one or the other. So yeah, so let's see how this code runs. Yeah, looked happy. Let's see what it did. I closed the console. Let's just open the console again. Printed out some 8s. How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It printed out exactly 8. Third type of loop error I could have would be to print out how many? 9. It's a fence post error. Thank you very much. Who said that? You said that? Yes, a fence post error. The fence post error would have been if I'd said less than or equal to 8. Yeah. That would have been bad. Or if I'd started with 1. Yeah. So the C idiom that we always use is we normally start with 0 and we use less than the terminal condition. If I did this, how many are going to print out? Well, I don't even want to print them out. Let's print out, not E, let's print out the counter. Let's print out the counter. Yeah, can you see what I'm doing? Prints out counter 0, counter 1, counter 2, goes all the way up to counter 8. You can see there's 9 of those. Yeah. Let me move that over the side. Lots of errors you could have with loops. They are a bit error prone, but all loops luckily have more or less the same structure. They have something at the beginning here which we call initialization, where you set up something, and normally it's the counter or whatever the thing is going to control the loop. You do some sort of initialization. Then you have some sort of test that usually involves the thing you've initialized. Then you do some work between the brackets. Everything between the bracket gets done over and over again. Every time it reaches the end of the curly brace, it re-evaluates the condition. If the condition is true, it does the braces again. If the condition is false, it jumps to the end. Jumps down to here in this case, to the return. Jumps to the end of the brace. Jumps to the next part. Jumps to here. That's a comment. Okay, so there's some work, and at the end of the work, there's normally some sort of update. What happens if you leave the update off? Infinite loop. What happens if you forget to initialize stuff? Random behavior. What happens if you get the counter condition wrong? You could get infinite loop, you could get a fence post error, or you could not even enter the loop possibly. Is that what you saying? Yeah, there. Okay, and I think we've hit all the places where we can hit errors. Okay, any questions about loops? Yes?
What about the process?
What no, we don't do that loop. We're only using while loop. Yep. There are different flavors, syntactical sugars, different ways of doing tests. We're not going to do them. This is the most general of all the tests. Now, we'll see them at the end of the course. We'll show everyone all the bits of syntax and see that they haven't seen, but we don't need them. Okay, we've seen how to print out 8 E's. What if instead of printing out, which is a bit boring, printing out 8 E's, let's do a bit of input. What if I wanted someone to type something in and I wanted to count how many E's they typed in? That would be cool. Right, let's do that. So we're going to get people to type stuff in, and we're going to count how many times they type in the letter E. Now scanf isn't very good. It reads a whole line. That's just a disgusting thing. It's a mess. I'm going to show you a new way of reading stuff in that reads in just one character at a time. It's called getChar. GetChar reads just one character in. What am I going to call it? Character. Let's call it plain char. The plain char equals getChar. This, when the computer gets to this line, what it will do is it will read in one character and store that thing it reads in plain char. What would you think the type of plain char would be? You'd think it'd be a char. I've even used char in the name to mislead you. It's actually an int. And that is for a fancy reason. Does anyone know what the fancy reason is? I'm sure lots of people know the fancy reason. What's the fancy reason? You could read in different character sets? That's not the reason I need now. It's an ASCII value? No, ASCII values, chars are really ints, like they're very short ints, numbers, yeah?
Returns the index.
Int is faster. So if you want to read the whole word.
No. It can read in any legal character you can type in, and it will return that. But there's one special character it can return. End of file. When it reaches the end and everything's finished, it needs to tell you somehow I've finished reading stuff in. I've reached the end of everything. And that's called end of file. And there's no character universally agreed to mean end of file. So the people that wrote this library had it return a number outside the character range when it reached the end of file. So it'll either return a number, which is a character that it's read in, or it'll return some special value, which means I've reached the end of file. And the special value is EOF. Thank you very much. It's a number. Who cares what that number is? It's got a special name, which is EOF, hash defined to be EOF. Now we'll have to load EOF in. Is that? I don't think EOF's defined in stdio.h. Well, let's see if it is. So it might be hash defined in there. Let's have a look here. So we're going to get rid of our counter, but we've got plain char. We don't need our counter anymore. And we're going to do something like while plain char is not equal to EOF. Now what have I done wrong? Printf. Let's just print out what they printed in, and let's print it out as a character. We don't need this update. Oh, now that looks pretty good. What do you reckon? Phew. Don't know. Is it good? It wants me to read something in. Let me type in a G. Print out G and some funny, what did it, print out a G and then what happened here? Well, I hit an enter key and it printed out an enter. And what does an enter look like? Well, it just drops to the next line. And what if I type in GWEN? Now the computer's a bit lazy and it doesn't bother giving the program any input till I hit the enter key. So although the program's quite happy to read a character at a time, it's not going to get any characters till I hit enter. So let's hit enter and it'll get them all. Print out GWEN and then it prints out the enter. And to finish, I go Control D and it's printed out Control D and lo and behold, the end of file character appears to be /377. And we've reached the end. Okay, is everyone cool with that? People are packing up because it's time to go? There's a mistake in this program. Shh, shh, shh. And the mistake is this. Can anyone see what the mistake is? I've forgotten one of the 4 areas where you can make a mistake. I made a mistake in one of those areas, which is the initialization. It doesn't read in an initial character. Plain char is filled with rubbish at the beginning when we do that first test. Hypothetically, if it was full of the EOF character, it would crash. So your challenge for this week is to rewrite this so it's initialized properly with the first character typed in. Okay, go. See you on Wednesday.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing as Xcode for Windows?
Yes.